Hello 11 English 1102 friends. This is another video. This should be, for a lot of you, the last piece of the ethics and morality module. This should be a quick video. We're just going to cover 3 poems. We are going to cover Be Drunk by Charles Baudelaire, Advice to My Son by Peter Meinke, and then The Deer Lay Down Their Bones by Robinson Jeffers. The first two, Be Drunk and Advice to My Son, sort of play off of each other. They present 2 different sort of ways of being or ethical ideas about how you should approach the world. And then The Deer Lay Down Their Bones presents this third sort of vision or situation about what makes life worth living, or what certain people and what the particular narrator in this poem has to live for. So we're going to dive into those. The poem Be Drunk by Baudelaire is clearly much older than the other 2. Baudelaire was a 19th century writer. You see there he lived from 1821 to 1867. This poem is often, I've been teaching this poem for years now, this poem is often really popular with students, especially once we sort of dig into it and get into the idea that it's not just about drinking a bunch and getting drunk. It's about feeling intoxicated on your life and being sort of totally into your life, being so totally intoxicated on your life on a everyday, moment to moment, hour by hour basis, and the ways that you do that. And you see right here, he says, you have to always be drunk. That's all there is to it. It's the only way, so as not to feel the horrible burden of time that breaks your back and bends you to the earth. You have to be continually drunk. And again, one of the central concepts of this poem is that this is not about, he mentions wine here, but this is not about alcohol or being intoxicated on being intoxicated in this sort of traditional, the superficial way that you might think of. And that becomes clear in the second stanza, which is just this one line. But on what? Wine, poetry, or virtue, as you wish, but be drunk. The wine, poetry, and virtue has a bunch of connections you can make. Often when scholars read this poem, wine, poetry, and virtue, what they connect that to is body, mind, and soul or spirit, or whatever you want to call it, because wine would affect you physically, the body. Poetry is this intellectual stimulant, mind, and virtue is this sort of spiritual, soul-oriented, being good, being ethically or morally good. And so what you get here, Baudelaire is saying, is whatever kind of person you are, whatever stimulates you, whether it's physical stimulation or intellectual stimulation or spiritual stimulation, do that, but you have to always do it. You have to be continually doing that. You have to be continually fueling yourself, taking in the things that make you happy, that makes you feel intoxicated on life. And if sometimes on the steps of a palace or the green grass of a ditch, so if you're rich or if you're poor, in the mournful solitude of your own room, you wake up, you're alone, you sort of feel isolated, you feel lonely, you wake again, your drunkenness already diminishing or gone. So you wake up, we all have these mornings, you wake up, you're like, not today, I can't do it today, I'm not feeling it today. What you have to do in those moments is ask the wind, the wave, the star, the bird, the clock, everything that is flying, everything that is groaning, everything that is rolling, everything that is singing, everything that is speaking. Ask what time it is. And wind, wave, star, bird, clock will answer you. It is time to be drunk. This is an important second layer of this poem, because what you get is this idea that not the reason that you have to always be drunk, the reason that you have to be continually finding things that sort of feed you and make you feel intoxicated and make you feel alive, is that is the natural way. That is the way of nature. That is the way of the wind and the waves and the birds. All of the parts of nature want you to be this way. This is how you're in harmony with nature, is this being intoxicated on life. Whatever it takes to do it, whether it's something that intoxicates your body physically or something that intoxicates you intellectually. Wine could be some kind of physical substance that you could take in. It could be alcohol. It could be some kind of drugs. It could be something as small as chocolate or coffee or Coke, some kind of caffeine stimulant, something that physically stimulates you. Poetry is something intellectual, like music or poetry or TV, a show or a movie or something like that, or reading a book, something that sort of makes you feel intellectually wound up and excited. And then virtue is this sort of either being good or being good at something, being virtuous. This sort of being good, doing good deeds, the sort of giving, it's always better to give than receive ideology, or being virtuous, just being really good at something and performing that or acting that out, some kind of activity that you're virtuous at. And the reason this is important is so as not to be the martyred slaves of time. Be drunk, be continually drunk on wine, on poetry, on virtue as you wish. You come back to this image right here, the horrible burden of time, the martyred slaves of time, so that you don't just pass your life, so that life doesn't just pass you by, just sort of every day grinding you down, and every day is just another the sort of repetitive, tedious experience. You have to make yourself be drunk on whatever works for you, whatever kind of substance or experience does it for you, but you have to be drunk, and you have to be continually maintaining this and monitoring this as this sort of state of being. And so Baudelaire gives you this very sort of romanticized, intense way of you have to constantly be on your guard, and if you feel yourself sobering up or not being totally into it, you have to wake yourself back up and make yourself drunk again. That is different than the idea that you get in Advice to My Son by Peter Minke, which he also uses imagery like wine, poetry, and virtue. And in fact, you get some wine imagery at the end of this poem too, but he uses it differently. And his ideology, his sort of ethics of being and how you have your best life and how you go about being in the best way is different. You get this first stanza, and the first stanza develops this one idea. The trick is to live your days as if each one may be your last. For they go fast, and young men lose their lives in strange and unimaginable ways. And so what you get right there is you have to live every day as if it's going to be your last, because it may be. Young people lose their lives in strange and unimaginable ways. You get sick from some kind of virus and die, or you get hit by a car or something terrible. There's all kinds of terrible accidents that cut people's lives short. But at the same time, you also have to plan long range, for the days go slow. If you survive shattered windshields and bursting shells, if you're not killed in a car wreck or a war or something like that, you will arrive at our approximation here below of heaven or hell. You'll have a long life. You'll have many days, and you have to figure out what to do with those days and how best to use that time. To be specific, assuming that you live a long life, between the peony and the rose, plant squash and spinach, turnips and tomatoes. That's the first sort of balancing act that he uses to show you how to live your days as if each one may be your last, but at the same time plan long range. What he's showing you here is between the peony and the rose, that's the be in the moment. Aim for beauty. Have beauty in your life. Be in the moment. Plant squash and spinach, turnips and tomatoes. What you get is this garden, and you've got the beautiful stuff that you can enjoy in the moment, the flowers, but also the food that's growing that you'll need if you live long range. The squash, the spinach, turnips, and tomatoes. Beauty is nectar, for your soul, for your spirit, to go back to the be drunk Baudelaire idea. But the stomach craves stronger sustenance than the honeyed vine. You need some food to live on. You'll need the squash and spinach and turnips and tomatoes if you live a long life. Therefore, marry a pretty girl after seeing her mother. That's a sort of joke, funny. The two lines right here: marry a pretty girl after seeing her mother. The marry a pretty girl is the sort of living in the moment, being intense, being excited about the moment. After seeing her mother, see her mother too, so you'll see what she looks like in 20 or 30 years or something like that. You got a long range plan. It's this sort of silly joke line. Show your soul to one man. So when you feel like you've got a good friend that you can be honest with and tell your secrets to or sort of bare your soul to, do it. But just work with another. Not everybody's going to be like that. Some people are deep friend. You can have deep friendships with. Some people you're just acquaintances. Just get what you need out of them, out of the acquaintance. And always serve bread with your wine. You need the wine, you know. That's the being intoxicated, to go back to Baudelaire. But you need the bread, the sustenance, the daily bread, the sort of like what basically sustains you. But son, always serve wine. So he comes back to the idea that you do have to live in the moment. You have to serve the wine. You have to have the day-to-day, moment-to-moment experiences that make life fun and beautiful and keep you intoxicated. But you got to have the bread too. So you have this much more, with Minke's poem, Advice to My Son, you have this much more balanced. You need the bread and the wine. You need the flowers, but you also need the vegetables. That's how you live your days, as if each one may be your last, but also plan long range. Just this much more balanced perspective than Baudelaire's. You have to always be drunk. And then the last poem in this section is The Deer Lay Down Their Bones. This poem is very much a poem about a person who is clearly having one of Baudelaire's dark days. He feels like giving up, and you find out why in the second stanza. What is also very interesting about this poem is it is 2 stanzas long, and the first stanza is this straightforward, you know the setting, it's just this basic guy walking through the woods and he finds this little stream. The second stanza is this much more metaphorical leap into what this stream means and why he feels very intense feeling about this particular place that he finds walking through the woods. I followed the narrow cliffside trail halfway up the mountain. So he's walking on this trail on a mountain in the woods. Above the deep river canyon, there was a little cataract. And cataract here is just a little stream that runs over the little trail, the path that he's walking on. There was a little cataract across the path, flinging itself over tree roots and rocks, shaking the jewel fern fronds, bright, bubbling water, pure from the mountain. But a bad smell came up. And so he walks up to this stream, and it's this pure, clear water, but there's a bad smell. And he's like, why is this bad smell coming from this nice, pretty water? Wondering at it, I clambered down the steep stream some 40 feet. So he follows the stream down to see where this bad smell is coming from. And found in the midst of bush oak and laurel, hung like a bird's nest on the precipice brink, a small hidden clearing. So on the side of this stream, he finds this little clearing that's been cleared out in the woods. Grass and a shallow pool. So right before the water goes over this cliff, there's a little pool. But all about there were bones lying in the grass. Clean bones and stinking bones. Antlers and bones. So he finds this just animal bones everywhere. And I understood that the place was a refuge for wounded deer. There are so many hurt ones. Escape the hunters and limp away to lie hidden. Here they have water for the awful thirst and peace to die in. Dense green laurel and grim cliff make sanctuary, and a sweet wind blows upward from the deep gorge. And so you get this straightforward physical description. He finds this little place where wounded deer, that maybe they've hurt their leg, or maybe they've been shot, but they're not dead yet. And that what they can do, the reason this place is important, is they can wander into this place and sort of be safe. They can lay down right by the stream and have water, and they can either sort of die in peace or rest and get better and recover and get up and go again. They can just lay here and be relatively safe and have water to drink until they either recover or pass away. And then you get this sort of shocking, startling line. I wish my bones were with theirs. And so he wishes he could just lay down and die here like the deer have. But that's a foolish thing to confess and a little cowardly. And so even as he says it, he's like, but I know I can't do that. I know that's cowardly. We know that life is on the whole quite equally good and bad, mostly gray neutral. And so what you get right there, on the whole quite equally good and bad, mostly gray neutral. You know, most days are just these sort of okay days or good days. Most days are not awesome, just mind-blowingly good or mind-blowingly bad. Most of getting through life is just this sort of flowing along, and things are okay, and if you're really lucky, things are good and they're flowing along good, and can be endured to the dim end, no matter what magic of grass, water, and precipice and pain of wounds make death look dear. We have been given life and have used it. Not a great gift, perhaps, but in all honesty, should use it all. And so what he says is, sometimes life is tough. Sometimes it feels like not a great gift. But since you've been given this gift, but in honesty, should use it all. You have to use it all, even the tough parts. Mine, his life, the narrator's life, mine's empty since my love died. Empty? So he says, look, you find out the source of his pain. The reason he wants to lay down and die is because his wife has died. But then again, immediately he questions himself and says, empty? The flame-haired grandchild with great blue eyes that look like hers? And so immediately he says, but it's not empty. I have things to live for. He immediately thinks of his grandchild, his granddaughter, who looks kind of like his wife and reminds him of his wife. What can I do for the child? I gaze at her and wonder what sort of man in the fall of the world. I am growing old. That is the trouble. My children and little grandchildren will find their way. And why should I wait 10 years yet, having lived 67? 10 years more or less. And so again, he's sort of just thinking about laying down and giving up right here. He says, look, I've had 67 good years. What difference is 10 or even one more going to make here? I should just lay down and give up. Before I crawl out on a ledge of rock and die snapping like a wolf who has lost his mate. And so again, he just wants to be like these animals and lay down and give up. But I am bound by my own 30-year-old decision. Who drinks the wine should take the dregs. If you don't know what dregs are the last little bit of sediment and junk at the bottom. People often don't drink it. You see that last little bit of sort of sludge at the bottom, especially if something like a beer or a coffee or something, that last little bit of sludge at the bottom. And he takes that and makes it a metaphor where he says, if you're drinking life, you got to drink it all, even that last little bit at the bottom. He drinks the wine should take the dregs, even in the bitter lees and sediment, even in that last little leftover bit, the last few years of your life. New discovery may lie. The deer in that beautiful place lay down their bones, so it's fine for the deer to lay down and give up. I must wear mine. I must wear my bones. And so his ethics in this poem is this sort of, there are still things to live for. There are still beautiful, happy things in the world. And so he has to get up and keep living and not just lay down like the deer here. He's been wounded. He's lost his wife, but he has to get up and keep going. He has to wear his bones. So you have this ethical decision here about, in the midst of this despair and intense sadness, you have to keep going and find meaning in life. You have to keep looking, you have to keep finding ways to be drunk, like if you want to use Baudelaire's language, or you have to keep living through this approximation here below of heaven or hell. You have to keep going. You have to find some more wine to drink in the particular language or imagery of all three poems, because you get who drinks the wine should take the dregs. Even here, all three of these poems have this sort of wine imagery where you have to keep drinking metaphorically. You have to keep finding ways to make yourself feel intoxicated. So there is an ethics to all of these finding ways of making meaning for your life and finding purpose in your life, and for Baudelaire, finding happiness the way you go through day-to-day life. If you have questions about any of these, exams or paper-wise, or just anything in general, be in touch with me via email or whatever method of communication is useful to you. Otherwise, thank y'all for your time, and I'll see you for the next little video. Thanks a lot, y'all.